record. We'll get started. Good morning. I'm Rebecca Snyder. I'm the Executive Director of the Maryland, Delaware, DC Press Association, and I'd like to welcome you to the first webinar of our conference and awards week. We are so excited to have Rebecca Frank, who is the Vice President of Research and News Insight at the News Media Alliance. And News Media Alliance is actually just about to merge with the magazine publishers. So that creates a whole nother set of interesting research angles and audience development pieces. But Rebecca has, for the past nearly 5 years, has been focused at the News Media Alliance on understanding the needs and the behaviors of audiences, publishers, and advertisers. So she is going to share the keys to the castle for Generation Z. Rebecca, I'm going to highlight you and I'm going to spotlight you for everyone and turn it over to you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Rebecca. It's really a pleasure to be here with you all. So that was a lovely introduction. And what I will say about the work that we do at the News Media Alliance, for those of you who may be unfamiliar with us, is we work with news publishers. We're about to work, with magazine publishers, media publishers of different stripes worldwide to really understand their marketplace and to improve the conditions in which they do their work. That takes a lot of forms, public policy, lobbying, as well as understanding advertising and the subscription economy and changes in technology. And recently, one of the big questions we've been trying to answer, or not even, if not answer, really to wrap our arms around, is to understand the future of the news audience. Not just of the industry, not just of the business side, but who are the people who are actually consuming the news as news publishing evolves with technology, with change to become a more consumer-focused business? Can we understand the next generation of consumers to build a lifelong relationship with them? So in that vein, today I am excited to share with you Unlocking the Key to Gen Z, Insights and Ideas to Build Lasting Relationships with the Next Generation of News Consumers. So in today's session, we are going to go through the findings of a recent study we conducted of Gen Z, their relationship to news and paying for news, and we'll share with you what we've been able to understand. So we want to keep questions in the chat box. We will push them to the end just to make sure we have lots of time to cover all of the data, but also we will work to answer as many questions as possible. So I want to talk about the research. We conducted it in 2021, which means this is a study that is, we'll call it COVID aware, right? That understands the landscape in which we are now all operating. And what we did was to set out to understand the next generation of news consumers. Those are 20-somethings both in and completed with, as well as those who did not or currently do not attend college, those people who are starting out, starting their careers, starting their lives, and so on. We asked what specifically they want from a news source. So we have some directional questions, what would they want? What would they pay for? What would they trust? What kinds of decisions should news publishers be making? As you can see in our qualitative study that informed the quantitative research we did, we required our respondents to be digital subscribers to news. That is not a representative group of Gen Z, but we do think those are the kinds of people you want to be reaching. And so we started our question development by talking to them specifically. We did require that they were subscribed to a major news publication. That was just to help us understand sort of what they were looking at and to help us level set. We then moved into a quantitative study where we looked at the findings from our qualitative research and we looked to see how representative those findings were for Gen Z as a whole. But as we're talking about being representative of Gen Z as a whole, I think it's important to call out Gen Z is a large generation, and it is the most racially diverse generation that we've seen, certainly in the United States. It will be the most populous, And their dollars are coming for your business, I like to say. In 2019, when a lot of them were not even in their 20s, Gen Z had $143 billion in purchasing power. So if you imagine as things have changed and gone up, and habits have shaped and reshaped during the pandemic, this is a generation that you want to understand so that you can encourage them to trust you and build a business relationship with you. A few other things about Gen Z. They are young adults, they are not children, and they're digital natives. They've always had the internet. Most don't remember a time before smartphones were widely available, and they are on track to be both the most educated and most indebted generation ever. So as we're talking about Gen Z's needs, think about someone who is starting out in a career, who is looking at the world a certain way based on the way that they get digital information, and what other important things they are thinking about. So let's look at the numbers that came out of our quantitative study. When we asked, 60% rated themselves highly likely to use a local news product. There's a trend in news that things have become more nationalized, but the need for understanding what's going on in your community is always going to be there, especially as you are, let's say, getting your first apartment or moving to a new city to take a job. 51% read news daily, right? That's the number that say they read news daily. That doesn't count being inundated by news all the time. 33% rate themselves highly likely to pay for news. That's really good. 80% get news from social media. They use 4 average news sources per day. So you are not looking at a person who is only dependent on what you tell them. And about half said that a 6-month free trial to a local news outlet would motivate them to subscribe to that news outlet. Some of this is about awareness, about someone who, and we'll get into this later, but just doesn't know that much about your news brand, and saying to them, I have what you need. I want to call out that just because 80% of them use social media, they get news from social media, doesn't mean that you can or should ignore them. I think there used to be sort of this idea that social media was replacing traditional news. That's not the case. It's all supplemental. So speaking about their news habits and this constant news consumption, they graze on news all day. So the real question to ask yourself as a news publisher, are you providing news to Gen Z when Gen Z is looking for news from you? So if you think about the daily news routine, Facebook usage is going to spike in the morning. As the day goes on, they move to Instagram and Twitter, which are more about the mobile experience. And then TikTok and YouTube, their usage just spikes in the evening. So what you're seeing is understandable patterns and ways to be in someone's feed when they're looking for certain types of news. We do recommend that publishers start thinking about a multi-pronged approach, right? It combines email, text, social, push notifications. Gen Z is going to be present in different ways throughout the day, consuming differently throughout the day, and you can meet them where they are. Keeping an eye on your analytics, it requires some investment to understand how can you track how the different channels are doing. But if you are using different channels to do outreach, and you know that your target audience of Gen Z is using different channels to consume throughout the day, you do want to, it is worthwhile to invest in making sure that you're reaching them when and where they want to be reached. Okay, so what do they see when they get this news from different news sources? A lot of the time we're hearing from Gen Z that the things they're hearing about themselves and their peers are negative. So almost half said people in their generation are unfairly criticized for being lazy or irresponsible. They don't feel respected by the news that they're getting, and yet they continue to consume it. So I would encourage you all who work for publishers to go into your archives and to dig through and get a sense of the tone with which you are covering people in their 20s. You're trying to build a relationship directly with this audience. And a lot of what they feel that they're hearing is negative. In the full report that we released about this study, one of our respondents put it a really funny way. They said, if your barista insulted you every single day when you went to get coffee, you'd go out of your way to find another barista. Because here's the truth about Gen Z. We asked them what they wanted from a news source that they would pay for, what they wanted from their primary news source. They want news that's fact-checked, unbiased, accurate by trained professional journalists, including diverse opinions, presented in a straightforward way, and honest when mistakes are made. These are not actually characteristics of social media-based news, right? These are the characteristics of what we like to call the traditional news industry. There is a strong desire to help to understand the world, to have a trusted source that can help make sense of what's going on. And you have what Gen Z wants. As we said, you have what Gen Z wants. So we looked at the quantitative study, and we found 76% of respondents said what they want from their primary news source is fact-check news. 74% said that what they want is accurate and unbiased information. And 62% said what they want is news from trained and expert journalists. And I'll remind you, Gen Z is steeped in the ethos of social media, in the ethos of digital and the internet. And yet what they continue to tell us is that they are seeking credibility. But the real question is, do they know that you as a news source can provide them what they want? Or are you letting others, whether that is political figures, digital media influencers, all different kinds of, are you letting them tell your story to Gen Z? So here are some ways that you can prove that you can, as we like to say, show, not tell Gen Z that you understand them, that what is important to them is important to you. So we asked them, what do they like and dislike in terms of the content that they see in news outlets? So when we asked, what was on top of the list is that 62% said they want to see brands and companies, that includes publishers, being authentic, not being phony, being real. That includes coverage and topics like greenwashing or companies claiming that they support different kinds of rights, identity-based rights that are very important to Gen Z. 59% wanted their news source to highlight the importance of family. 56%, which is not a surprise given the environment in which Gen Z has become adults, wanted to highlight the importance of voting and the importance of political action. Similarly, social issues, whether or not these are things that you cover, there are some top issues that this generation is passionate about, including social justice, climate change, women's rights, healthcare reform, and college affordability. Are you covering these stories? Are you covering how these stories impact younger people, not just the people that you've traditionally covered in the past? And then rounding out the list in terms of the content they're looking for. Again, these are folks in their 20s. They're just starting out. They are becoming adults in a very different world than their parents did. They want advice on personal finance, understanding loans, and understanding, we'll talk a little bit more about it, but this crazy topic of crypto and the stock market and these things that adults should understand. They also want career advice, fitness advice, topics that really align well with, again, some of the more lifestyle areas of traditional news. You have the tools as news organizations to provide this information to Gen Z. It's really about thinking through, how are you positioning it? How are you telling that story in a way that makes sense to them? This is not advice that you should change what you cover. This is more about, can you as an organization think through the way that you're covering these issues, the way that you're telling these stories, the expectation of a base level of understanding or experience to make it as clear to them as possible. And once you've built the relationship with Gen Z, once you've engendered that trust, we also, as I mentioned, ask them what would get them likely to pay for a news source. A brief aside, so was born in the peak of the millennial generation, and I bring that up to say that for millennials like myself, we came of age in a moment where everyone was talking about making everything on the internet, news, content, video, making it all free. And so the millennial generation is not in the same vein as Gen Z in terms of thinking about paying for things. Those old habits really die hard. Gen Z doesn't have those old habits. They came up in an age when everyone was talking about paying for content, whether that's subscribing to Spotify or Netflix or The New Yorker or all of these online sources for information, for content, building one-on-one direct relationships with creators. Gen Z is growing up at a time when paying for the things that you consume online is normalized behavior. And so all you're trying to do is tell Gen Z, make it clear to them that of all the things that they could pay for online, news is incredibly valuable, and you as a news source can be trusted. So how do you do that? Build relationships with them where they are, that's in their social channels, that may require the use of compelling visual information. If you've not invested in figuring out a way to tell stories visually on those channels, I do absolutely encourage it. The next piece, so, if this is about showing Gen Z that you understand who they are, we talked about their tone, right? Don't belittle them, don't talk down to them, tune into what they are passionate about. Those are the issues that are going to be shaping the way that the world evolves. And if you're thinking about this question, we talk about this a lot in the industry, how do you get people to quote unquote eat their vegetables? Tie the things that they may not care about as much to the things that they do. So if you're talking about local news and land use, how does that connect to climate change? How does the price of real estate in a market connect to student loans? That sort of a thing. And then making it available to customize content for them, not the content that you create, rather the content that they see and receive. That shows them that you are listening and helping them prioritize. Do what you do best, show credibility. You've been building these brands for some time. You have that credibility in your market, use it. And then just these last two, right? We talked about this. They want to snack on news all day long. Consider when you are posting different types of stories, when you are sharing which information, knowing that people want quick hit news during the day. How can you position what you're doing as things are evolving or changing and reaching people again where they are, whether that's shifting from whether you're positioning on different social channels or using different devices. And they want that personalized experience. That's an experience that they are getting from some of the other channels. So if you think about what you're trying to compete with for attention, you have to let them be the boss of what information they're getting at what time. So let's talk about one other key finding that we had, which is the word newspaper really does not do well with this group. The concept of paper is just not how this generation wants to get news. They see it as wasteful. They see it as old-fashioned. It has nothing to do with the content that's included, but the idea of a newspaper is not something that they are going to have a strong connection to. What we found in some research was that millennials did grow up with a newspaper at their home. Gen Z did not. They saw it at their grandma's house. It's not the way that they think about paper, unfortunately, it does not reflect the digital nimble brands that you all have been focusing on building. So if there is some way to move away from that understanding of what you create, right, a wasteful product that's old and out of date, if you don't get it at the right moment, if you can move away from that mindset, you will continue to build that credibility. Knowing that you are more than just a paper, this might be the time really to embrace it. Okay, so we asked Gen Z specifically for some ideas, right? What might get them to try a news source, to try and pay, and to create that engagement and involvement to build a lifelong relationship. So these are some ideas from the audience. And rather than saying you have to do all of these things, I know it says listicle on there, and that is not something that works for everybody. We absolutely understand that. What can you do with the content that you already have, that you've invested in, or the the attempts for things like audience engagement and polls or student discounts, right? That's about starting relationships. How can you think about what it is you're already doing and meet them there that way? The idea of a Gen Z focused column or panel, that is a specific content suggestion. Again, that's a straightforward way to say, hey, this is a new group of people. Maybe we haven't done as good a job listening to or promoting what they're concerned about in the past, but we want to change that. And then I mentioned earlier, crypto and investing. This is a complicated time to be a young person, to think about your future. You can really, again, just by providing this information in a way that's meaningful to them, you're not just giving them the same financial advice that they hear from their parents. You're showing that that they are going to be building their careers and building wealth in a new way, and that you understand that and them and what they want. All right, so I like to end this by saying at the News Media Alliance, we like to put our money where our mouth is. So you can reach us on social media in all of these ways. But now I'm just excited to answer any questions that you might have. I know we went over a ton of information in not a ton of time. So yeah, let's start with what you've got.
So I'm saving up a question. This is Rebecca, and I wanted to understand if Gen Z really sees themselves as like, I'm part of Gen Z, or if they feel like they're more individual. I mean, I guess full disclosure, I'm Generation X, and it always just, when someone's like, oh, let's talk about Gen X, I always feel like that's not really me. You don't know my experience. And so having a column that's like, Gen Z, let's talk about it, is that off-putting to that group, or do they really see themselves as part of that cohort?
So that's a great question. I'll tell a little anecdote. I came up, as I mentioned, I'm a millennial, right? I was born at a time when there's very little debate about when the year that I was born. It was firmly within that generation. Generational cohorting is not something for individuals, right? It's really about how can institutions, groups, marketers understand the contours of the kinds of people that they're talking to. So with Gen Z, for example, they've grown up sort of being told, oh, you're in Gen Z, right? We talk about this more than really was ever discussed before. An important thing to keep in mind, this is a generation where identity is really, really important. So, even for example, recruiting for research, we looked into how we could best reflect the ethnic and racial diversity of this generation. Gender identity is much more self-defined than it's been in the past. So I think it's valuable to think about this generation as a group that each individual understands that while they are their own identity and they are not going to behave just as a woman or just as a person of color or just as someone who was born male, but that they are part of a broader group of people with whom they share certain experiences. So if you are, for example, trying to do content that's based at people, don't say this is our Gen Z column, say this is for people who just moved to town, right? Did you just move to Denver? Here are some things that lifelong Denverites want you to know. Are you a recent college graduate living in Houston? Here's how to get a job in Houston. Here are the kinds of issues that you may run into. Or are you a person paying student loans? Are you a person looking to get married? Are you a person looking to set up a 401k, right? It's experience-based. So it's tricky, right? Because this is a generation of individuals who are very focused on defining their own identity. But because of that, and because of the way that identity is defined now, or that people can define their own identities, it is more about sort of what is that experience that you have. And so connecting with them on that level. I don't think anybody in this generation is going to say they are speaking exactly to me, but if you are telling stories that reflect the different identities that Gen Z members, consider part of themselves, you can go that way. So a person who is who had been in the military and who is a Latino woman is going to have had multiple experiences from all of that. So if you can speak to her on one of these identities that is also informed by her age, you can connect with her that way. It's almost about understanding that people, the same way they get news from multiple sources, they bring multiple identities to the table. And so respecting them, you don't have to tell them, I'm only talking to you because you are XYZ, but more respecting that they are bringing XYZ with them to your content.
Oh, it's very interesting. Okay, we've got a couple of questions in the chat. So Brian is interested in knowing your take on podcasts and video, including things like Twitch, and how Gen Z feels about getting news through those types of formats.
Sure, they like that, right? Something like a podcast. This is a generation, as we said, so not only is it about, I picked it, I subscribed it, I had to find it, so I'm going to feel some ownership over it. But it's news that feels, that meets my terms. So if you are able to present your content in multiple ways, if you find that it's a way that will meet people that you want to connect with, it is worth investing in. Obviously, we can't do that analysis for everyone. For some audiences, Twitch is going to be more valuable. For some audiences, it's going to be podcasts. I remember reading once about podcasts that they were really good for certain markets when you had a lot of people commuting, but the commutes had to be a certain length and the podcast had to be a certain length. So again, that's that understanding where people are, what they're going to want. The people listen to podcasts when they're driving or when they're on the subway. But if you don't have a market where people commute a lot in that way, that podcast might not be right for you. So it's really about, if I can encourage you to do one thing, it's to stop calling yourself a newspaper. If I can encourage you to do two things, it's to just start looking at, for your younger audiences, what do you know about them, and building from there.
Got it. Okay. And I'm always blown away when people get news on TikTok, but it's perfectly valid. It's not just dances. And so there's all sorts of platforms that are coming out and keeping everyone on their toes. Now, Alex was interested in knowing if you know the names of the news organizations that your survey respondents were subscribing to. Any trends there that you want to talk about?
So when we did the qualitative research that required the subscriptions, we went very broad. So we had like one subscriber in Denver, and we can assume that was the Denver Post. And we had one subscriber in Miami, and that was the Miami Herald. So that, because of how we chose to set up the qualitative research, we didn't find any trends on purpose. I see the second half of your question is if there are places doing a good job at growing Gen Z audience. Rebecca mentioned TikTok. If you've not engaged with Dave Jorgensen, who is the TikTok editor, I believe his title is something else, but he runs the TikTok for the Washington Post. I don't really understand TikTok, but Dave sure does. And what he is doing is combining the medium with the way that the news needs to be shared. So, and what he has said on a number of occasions is, this is introducing the brand of the Washington Post journalism via TikTok, right? So they're growing their audience on the channel so that the people who find the news on that channel then go to them. So it's not about growing your TikTok audience just to have as many TikTok followers as you can, but it is always about bringing people back to the product. And the product is not the paper. The product is not even the subscription. The product is the journalism and the way that the journalism is consumed. And then, other publications that are doing well, many of the big national brands, but also publications that are in markets where there are a lot of young people. So the Boston Globe, the San Francisco Chronicle, right? If you're in a place where you've got a good sized market, you're obviously going to start reaching more of them. But again, that's because they are looking for information about where they are.
Mhm. Okay, that makes perfect sense. And then finally, Brian was asking about how Gen Z feels about subscription pricing. You mentioned earlier they're used to paying for stuff,
Right.
but how do they feel about pricing, and are there specific price points that are advantageous?
Yeah, I mean, look, if there's a way to start building a relationship with someone at a free trial or a very low cost trial, right? This is the generation that is used to, you know, prime costs $1 until it costs a lot more, when it's enough of your lifestyle that it is the most valuable thing you pay for. If you can experiment with free trials, with free college subscriptions, we want to encourage people to think about Gen Z as at the start of a relationship. So you have a lot of time to grow their lifetime value, which means that you can start out by getting a little bit of money and providing them a lot of value. So I would think about it that way. You know, as we mentioned, this is a generation, right? They're paying for Netflix, or they're borrowing someone else's Netflix, but they're consuming that information. They understand that there is a paid transaction happening that's creating value, or that's letting them consume something that has a value attached to it. If you can start there, you will set yourself up to be in a good place down the line when you want to, you know, figure out the right price point.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, those are all our chat questions. Are there any other questions or topics that are kind of bubbling up from anyone? Decisions. All right. Well, Rebecca, I feel like I have learned so much about the this Generation Z cohort, and really, I think it's so interesting that it is all about kind of personal identity, and whereas maybe other generations have been willing to be lumped together, this is a cohort that really wants to be seen for themselves and for their values and for the things that they are interested in. And they're not really interested in fitting into any boxes that we might have for them. So this has been particularly interesting. And I look forward to your next research. And actually, so whet our appetites a little bit. What's your next focus? Because I know you come out with reports almost every year.
Yeah, I think it's a bit early. We're still, you know, we're all in an age where we're constantly evolving. You know, we're looking into a number of issues that impact news publishers and how they operate. I don't want to give anything away. What I do want to say is that if there was information here that you would like to deep dive further into, you can get in touch with me and we can share the full white paper that we did on Gen Z. I know I, for one, am going to spend a lot more time with it to understand them even more as we go forward.
Terrific. Well, thank you all so much. This will be archived on our YouTube channel at MDDC Press, and I look forward to seeing you all again soon.
Bye.